Hello and welcome to part 14 of the Daggerfall modding series. In this case, locked loot containers. In the last part, we did some stuff that was pretty important to the overall, I guess you could say, interactivity and feel of the mod, that at least for what it will feel like, such as working on being able to bash the chest physically with your weapon that you currently have instead of just pressing a button on screen to say do this thing, as well as using the steal mode to just click the chest and attempt a lockpick instead of having to click a button from a dialogue, at least making it necessary to do that. And we still just only have the base framework for that stuff, and we still haven't even tested if it works. But in this part, we'll see how it goes, and we'll hopefully get more of that done. In this case, hopefully the bashing part, at the very least, and afterward I'll possibly do more reading on how I might do it for stuff like projectiles, arrow detection, ranged spell detection, spell detection itself, stuff like that. But for right now, it's going to be just the bashing. That's what I have planned at this moment. And then after I'm done with this, I will potentially test it in game, but I'll see. I'll see how I feel. But yeah, let us do that. So the first thing I'm going to be looking at is examples from the script weaponmanager.cs and the method weapon env damage, weapon environment damage, which is where I'm going to primarily copy and paste the behavior from, in this case, the Daggerfall action door bashing stuff, which detects a game object, and we're just going to be trying to detect our own custom game object in this case. Okay, I'm back, and it's been like about 2.5 hours since I paused, I think. For probably about 45 minutes at least of that 2.5 hours, though, I was just kind of fucking off and screwing around, so yeah. More like 1.5 hours of actual, like, quote-unquote work going on there. But anyway, I made some progress, probably less than I kind of expected, but I'm still happy with it, even though I haven't tested anything yet. But I think it's a good framework getting made here. So let's just, for simplicity's sake, I guess, and for myself, let's just try and go from top to bottom of the actual script, what was changed here and why. So there's one using thing added here for entity, just so I could use player entity, I believe. And then there's a few more global variables added, even though they don't necessarily need to be global. I just kind of like to make them like that. I don't know, it's just my preferred organizational thing. I probably should change their names, because, yeah, that's kind of going against the convention where for those kind of things you put a capital for each thing instead of lowercase and then capital. Yeah, I'll just do that. I'll just do that if I'm gonna do it, just so it's conforming with that sort of convention, I guess. And player, even though it might not be the best way to do this. But hey, better than nothing. Alright. Alright, now that that's done, I added a few more global variables here. One for player layer mask, which doesn't really matter necessarily what it does. It's just kind of replicating behavior from weapon manager. Same thing with main camera. Player, I have that for myself, for my own custom purposes, kind of. But the player mask, the mask is basically like yeah, player layer mask is a layer or whatever you call it in the Unity scene, or the Unity like environment, which basically allows you to like change between various kind of layers, I guess. Like it's kind of hard to describe in a way. But it's related to the Unity stuff. And in this case, it's used to basically say which things should be affected at this time when you put, say, throw out a raycast, which things should be affected by that are on a specific layers, essentially. So some things get ignored, other things, yeah, like some things get ignored and other things do not. The main camera one is for a similar reason. It's basically just there to have an origin and a place or direction that the raycast that I'm using, that a raycast will be cast from. This is once again used in the weapon manager part, so I'm just basically copying that behavior. And as well as copying that behavior in weapon manager's start method, it defines those values from there. So main camera, in my start now I have main camera equals that, player layer mask split equals that. It's really not going to affect much besides just having those variables available for this mod or whatever. It shouldn't be a big deal at all to do that in that way. But yeah, those things were those changes. Now the more major stuff within our update method. We added a few more if statements. Once again, this was just replicating a lot of weapon managers' behaviors around this point. So here we added another one, dot screen weapon, basically just checking if this screen weapon, FPS weapon, and then screen weapon thing is not null. And if it is null, then do not operate, because if we don't have that, then it'll throw an error potentially if we try to do something such as this. So it's just a safety thing kind of deal. And the same thing happens slightly further down with the main camera. Same deal. If we don't have main camera, then we don't have a point of origin for the raycast hit. So we should check if it's null or not. And it shouldn't be, but just in case. It's good practice. And then down further, inside of the, while the attack frame is going on, or whatever the hit frame is going on, and this stuff is running and it goes past all this stuff, it's not a bow, but it's a melee weapon of some sort, the main camera exists, or it's like not null and everything, then we will, as I was replicating the behavior from weapon manager for the same thing, basically, the detection of where a weapon is hitting. Now, there was some things I did change, pretty significant differences. So, fire ray along player facing using weapon range. So we define, or we just, I don't know, we just define raycast hit so it can be used later, or defined later. We make a ray, which it's just a Unity function. It just makes like a straight 2D, yeah, I guess it would be, I guess that would be a straight 2D line, or maybe it's a 3D line, I don't know. It just makes a straight line. And in this case, it's going to be using the main camera as the transform position and the transform forward, whatever. So at least it should be basically shooting out wherever the player is looking, like directly there. So if you're like trying to activate a door or something like that, it would be the same kind of deal. It's just shooting out a line and then seeing if it intersects with that thing that you're trying to detect. Which that actually doesn't happen yet. That happens here with physics.raycast. And then you give it the ray, which we made. Yeah, the ray which we made, and then it has out. It will return this value at some point of hit. If it hits anything, you have to give it the weapon manager.screenweapon.reach, the reach, which is just the value that is coming from FPS weapon, which is some default value. I think it's like 2.5 or some shit. It could be anything, obviously, whatever you want the distance to be. In my case, I want it to just be the default distance that the melee weapons have right now, which is 2.5 apparently. And you give it the mask that you want it to care about, essentially, which we have player layer mask. Now, the thing that was different from the weapon manager one that happens here is that it's using physics dot sphere cast instead of raycast. It uses raycast later, but it uses sphere cast as the first check. And I was a little bit confused at first. I'm like, so what's the difference between a sphere cast and a raycast? So I guess it should be fairly obvious, is that a raycast shoots a straight line or ray, whatever distance, and detects whenever or in this case, it detects whenever it hits something, I guess, collides with something along the way. Sphere cast, it doesn't do a ray, or it does a ray, but it shoots out, instead of like just that straight line, it shoots out a sphere with it, like a ball essentially. And whenever that ball, any part of its edges, essentially intersects with some object, just like with raycast, then that will be detected and it will be considered a hit or whatever. It'll become one of the hit objects here, or it'll detect whatever it hit. Now, the reason it's done as a sphere cast in Weapon Manager is because, at least as far as I could tell, is that it's like that to give the idea of cleaving, kind of like when you I'm doing something physically with my hand right now, but when you try to like slash with a sword or a weapon or whatever, or in the game when you see the weapon going across the screen, that would obviously hit, at least in, the idea is that it would hit probably things around you, not just in a straight line that you're looking at. So that sphere is meant to sort of simulate or emulate that sort of like cleaving, quote unquote, sort of thing, so that your weapon will potentially, when you swing it, can hit multiple things within your camera field of view, kind of deal. Or at the very least, it'll be detected that it tried to hit one of those things. Unlike a raycast, would just be a straight line shooting out from your camera. This sphere would potentially, depending how big it is, how big the radius is, potentially detect multiple things, or things that are not center of your screen. That's the idea. But I don't need that, and I don't actually want that, because I don't want you to, personally, I don't want to have unintentional, at least prevent as many as possible, unintentional attempts at bashing a chest that, say, if you're hitting an enemy and you happen to look slightly down or something while you're attacking an enemy that's near a chest, I don't want you to unintentionally bash the chest by doing that. So I'd rather it be like a completely, for the most part, as much as I could get it, intentional thing. So the way that you try to bash, even if it doesn't really make sense on the screen because your weapon is going across the screen, is that just like when you click on a door or an NPC, you have to actually look at it directly before it'll potentially be detected for that. So you have to look at the thing directly, basically, as much directly as its collision allows, and then swing, and then that would detect if it's a bash or not. So that's the main thing I changed, is changing the sphere cast to a ray cast. And even in the other one, it does later on do a ray cast for apparently trying to detect more precise things or less precise things, with like going in between bars or something, like stuff like that. But I'm not worried about that. It should work fine with a ray cast for what I'm trying to do. And then this other stuff, these three things just are there to get the current right hand weapon that the current weapon that the player has in the right hand, and the current weapon the player has in the left hand, and then use those to determine which weapon the player is actually using as their current weapon, like that they're swinging with and such, and then make that get that item as the quote unquote striking weapon in this case, which then will be used later on to determine various factors like you know the weight of the weapon, the material, the type of the weapon, stuff like that to determine stuff, the chances of of bashing open the chest, damaging it, unlocking it properly without damaging it, all that stuff, as well as dealing damage, condition damage, and stuff to the weapon, potentially other stuff, all that stuff. That's what it's being done here for, and that's why it's being used as a parameter later on for this attempt melee chest bash method. And then after that stuff is defined, check if hit has a LLC object component, which we are checking here. We're checking if whatever was hit by this ray happens to have the component LLC object, our custom LLC object. And if it does, if it's not null, then it will execute this next line, which is the attempt melee chest bash method, which then just does exactly what we did before. We just had to change a few things here and there. Some things I might be able to remove and clean up and stuff later, but for right now it should work. Basically do what we did when we clicked that button to bash. Now it'll do that same stuff when we try to bash it with the weapon, like actually attack it. And this is going to be much more refined later and everything like that, adding logic and everything. And I also have to add the bashing sound, which is shouldn't be a big deal. And that is, yeah, that is essentially all I did, which should be, at least for the basic framework behavior, the bashing stuff taken care of, thankfully. As I said, just the basic parts of it. I was thinking it was actually going to be more difficult than this. Even though this isn't like my optimal way I'd like to have this done. It's not as big of an issue, hopefully, as I thought it would be. It doesn't look like it should be causing that much, like, quote-unquote strain or, like, processor problems or anything like that. Like, crazy amount of extra stuff going on just for this one function. So that's good. We'll have to see how it actually is in the end, but I'm guessing it won't be that big of a deal. Even if it's not the optimal way I'd like it to work, but it should work, hopefully. Looking at how I might do the spell detection. So yeah, I wrote down. So with this done, for the bashing at least, tomorrow I will most likely get into the stuff where we can detect. We will detect if the player has a open spell ready, just like when you try to open a door, and do whatever logic we want to involving that, which apparently is going to be coming from player activate, so that shouldn't be too big of a deal, hopefully. At least the basic framework part of it. The actual details, it might get more complicated. And then after that, which we will hopefully also be able to start tomorrow, is I'll have to be doing research, a lot of research into how we will detect projectiles, which I might be exaggerating, like, or overestimating how difficult it really will be when I think about it, but we'll just have to see. We'll have to see how to detect if say an arrow hits the chest object, or especially a spell projectile hits the chest object, or the AoE effect, the area of effect part of a spell hits the chest object, and then do whatever logic we want to involving that in a similar way with the bash. But it's going to be different because it's not going to be connected to the player per se, but connected to whatever projectile object was created for that projectile. So that's something I haven't really worked with much, and I've had difficulties understanding sometimes, but hopefully we'll be able to get started on that and get some progress there. But yeah, that's basically what I did today, even though it took longer than I expected as usual. But hopefully that explaining was somewhat useful, kind of in my process of doing this. But yeah, I'm gonna go start the next episode. Well, even though it is late for the Daggerfall DOS Let's Play, and then I'm gonna go to sleep. But thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.